Yes, so welcome to this afternoon's, morning's, evening session, the COVID-19 pandemic and art. My name is Stefan Kohler. I'm a member of the Global Young Academy, and it's my pleasure to host this session today with my Global Young Academy colleague, Andreea Molnar. This session is part of the 19 in Art project in the Global Young Academy. And today, 4 of my colleagues, they want to introduce how they work on the intersection of the COVID pandemic and art. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce to you our 4 further GYA colleagues, Anna Harris, an anthropologist. And Anna will tell us about data sensorializations. Then there will be Bach Tran, a health economist, who will share his experience with art therapy. Then we will be joined by Cristina Blanco Sío-López, a historian who worked with cartoons. And last but not least, our colleague Sergey Kostyrko, a solid mechanics researcher, who will tell us about the challenges of artists and sound art. And all of these topics will be in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. To summarize these themes a little bit, we have 3 connection points between art and the COVID-19 pandemic. The one connection point is like art as a way of looking at data in a way that is different from statistical analysis. And I think Anna and Sergey are touching on that topic. Then Cristina uses art as data with which she works. And then Bach's work, I think, uses art to mitigate some of the health effects of the pandemic. So in this session, I would like to invite all of our 4 presenters to, first of all, present their work in about 5 minutes. And then hopefully we have time for questions to each of the speakers. And then we'll finish the session with a concluding remark by all participants. The session will be for about 40 minutes. And it's my great pleasure, Anna, to ask you first to tell us about your work.
Great, thanks so much, Stefan. I've got an echo, so I'll try and ignore that. I wanted to present basically the purpose was to throw out a few projects and ideas which bring together science and art to see which might lead to some connection with you. So I am going to talk about data sensorialization, but I also wanted to briefly mention how our research team has used creative methods as a form of collaborating during the pandemic, and to put a plug for a project that the Science and Art group are doing. So that's kind of my purpose in my 5 minutes. So I'm going to start with the data sensorialization project that we are collaborating on from the Netherlands. So you may have heard of different ways of presenting data. Of course, what's so common and popular these days, particularly in the pandemic, are data visualizations. And these are so powerful and shape knowledge and show knowledge in particular ways. And perhaps less familiar, but really growing in popularity, and I think Sergey is going to talk more about this, is data sonification. And this is when you turn a data set into some kind of sound output. And Sergey can talk a lot more about that. But what we became really interested in was how can we expand how we deal with data to a more kind of broader sensory profile, where we think about edible data, danced data. You may know the Dance Your PhD competition. I am interested in crafted data. You may have seen, for example, the weather blankets where people knit climate data over time. And why I'm interested in this is because I study, I use the senses in my research. I find it's a really important avenue into scientific research. But what it's so important in terms of pandemic related research is I find that the more and more data gets aggregated and used in these different contexts, the more distance we feel as individuals. So the aim of the project is to use data sensorializations to create a more intimate, a more visceral and felt engagement with these huge issues of scale. And we do the same with climate data. So to offer just a very concrete example, I'm playing around with some various knitted data. So for example, recently I've knitted the screen data use of my laptop and mobile phone for a smartphone cover. So this shows my screen data in knitted stitches. So it gives me a kind of different engagement with data than different kind. But I think I'm really using my 5 minutes, Stefan. So I just want to give a short plug for that project. We're really open for collaborators, scientists and artists working together to think about data sensorialization. So it's a project in progress. I wanted to just explore the idea of using creative methods in research team collaborations. We do this in this team that's building data sensorializations. We send each other things in the post. We collect data in different ways. Lately we've been collecting our touch data. So all the things that we touch, we're creating postcards that we send to each other. So we use these kind of artistic methods as ways of building team collaboration. I'm really interested in if any of you do that. And a very short plug for the Sketches of Science project, which we'll talk about more in the next session, and you can find more in the Science and Art working group. I think that's my 5 minutes, Stefan.
Thank you so much, Anna. Also to our participants joining the session, feel welcome to already write questions in the chat. I would go on and ask all speakers to share their project and work first before we start with questions. But yeah, the chat is already open and oral questions will also be possible. So next I would like to ask Bach to share his work. And Bach, you are joined by some of your team members. So we look forward to hear about your research.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Bach Chan. I'm health economist. Right now I'm leading a project in Vietnam working on the early warning system for the COVID-19 prevention and control in Vietnam. And we're interested in the children protection, especially not only the physical impact of COVID-19, but also the mental health deteriorations, given the fact that Vietnam, even the pandemics is only in certain areas, but the general impact on children is substantial. We start a project looking at the art therapies and how it's worked among children. And I would like to introduce my two junior researchers who are actually implementing the project, Ms. Tung Vu and Ms. Minh Anh. Will give a very short presentation on that. Please allow Tung to show the slide, please.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'll go ahead and share my screen. It seems like I don't have permission to share my screen.
Now you should have it.
Thank you. I think it's working. Really appreciate it. All right, so I'll go ahead and start the presentation. All right, Minh Anh, I think you would like to start the presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Tom. Good morning. My name is Minh Anh and my teammate is Sơn Tung Vu. Today we will present on a topic about utilizing art therapy as a mindfulness practice. We will go over current situation and art therapy techniques, benefits of art therapy, our project implementation, its sustainability, examples of Vietnamese art therapies, and our key messages. So next slide, please. According to the UNICEF, 27% of adolescents report feeling anxiety, while 15% of them have depression after the hit of the COVID-19. Vietnam has more than 6 million disadvantaged children, alongside with poor, migrant, and minority children, forming a large number of children who are mentally and physically vulnerable after the pandemic. Next slide, please. In order to improve children's mental health, researchers are studying the effectiveness of art therapy. These include sound, genre, VR, expressive, and narrative therapy. You can see the definition and effect of these therapies on the PowerPoint. So in short, it's a technique of using a certain art form to treat human psychological problems. Our presentation today will focus only on art therapy. So art therapy brings many benefits to the patients. First, it is known for its mindfulness qualities. By requiring great attention to the detail, art therapy induces a peaceful state of mind and reducing anxiety, and is an excellent form of self-expression. And secondly, art therapy is also a powerful alternative to traditional therapy because it's easy to access and practice on one's own. So by showing that children practicing art therapy have lower score in mental health examination, this study confirmed the effectiveness of art therapy in helping children cope with troubling feelings. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about how we're going to implement this project. So the first step is that we're going to be developing an integrated curriculum that integrates guided art therapy practice, as well as the verbal instructions on mindfulness as the participants are practicing art. And then we'll be collecting post-practice self-evaluations. And depending on the situation of COVID-19, the format of these sessions are going to be either virtual, in-person, or hybrid. And these are some of the various forms of art therapy that we can consider trying, for example, calligraphy, music therapy, painting or drawing therapy, or pottery therapy. So these are the stages of implementation. First, we'll be conducting pilot sessions for these art therapy sessions in Vietnam, and then we'll collect data, monitor and evaluate the effectiveness, as well as gauge the participants' interest. And then we'll be assessing skill-up opportunities. So these art therapy sessions have various benefits for mental and emotional health, and they're also easily accessible and cheap. However, in Vietnam, there's a lack of public awareness regarding mental health, and also there's stigma surrounding mental illness. However, there are also opportunities because the Vietnamese people are starting to prioritize emotional and mental well-being as they are experiencing their fourth wave of COVID already. And the novelty of art therapy, it means that there's room for development and room for attraction to the younger generation, especially. However, given the public health facilities in Vietnam, we anticipate that there's going to be limited human and financial resources for community-based mental health services. So the key takeaway from our presentation is that we seek to utilize art therapy as an alternative therapy, and it means that we're combining creativity, culture, and health services to respond to COVID-19 related health challenges. And with that, I would like to conclude the presentation, and we can move to Q&A if the floor is open. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Bach, and to you and your team. And I would, without further ado, hand it over to Cristina to ask you, Cristina, to share your work.
Okay. So let me see. Okay, now you can see me. Hello, nice to see everybody. So first of all, as a historian, I would like to start showing the sources. And this is something I think it's very interesting for the project as well. It's a compendium of all cartoons on the COVID-19 pandemic published in the United States in 2020 by the New Yorker. So I think it's something we can we can also share and explore, but I feel very privileged to be very close to the sources. And I would also like to invite everybody to stay for the next session, because I will have a more in-depth presentation and a PowerPoint with slides in the Science and Arts panel. But here I would prefer to just hint at some principles, which and the they are the basis of the work of a historian applying critical historical analysis to the study of cartoons as a primary source to understand the pandemic. And this is something I have shared with you, Stefan, this idea, this binary of mirrors and triggers. And of course, it's inspired by Bertolt Brecht and this idea that art is not just a mirror that reflects reality, but it's also a hammer with which to shape it. And in order to apply that to the very specific sources of cartoons, what I discovered through the analysis of many of these graphic expressions was that it would be more accurate to talk about mirrors and triggers. They do reflect reality, but at the same time, they also trigger changes. And this is also the expectation of a historian. Can we learn from the past and change in new directions? And of course, we have all been very negatively affected by the pandemic in terms of personal losses and challenges and limitations of mobility and interaction. And I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to use technology as a way to stay connected together. So in that sense, cartoons and also the way they are produced in a constant way from many different perspectives from all over the world. And I also mentioned to you this morning this book that appeared in Italy called My COVID and Comics, which gathers together 173 artists from all over the world. So very much in the spirit of the Global Gen Academy, representing the evolution of the pandemic, how we see it and how we can change through the art of cartoons. So it's published in Italian and all the comments are in Italian, but I think the language is pretty universal and cartoons act like a form of pictogram. They really compress meanings and they are a form of a universal language, which are also shared through the digital means. I mean, we see that in social media. We many times interact and have a correspondence, have exchanges through images, through icons. So this is something very much close to my heart in terms of analysis. And that's what I would like to study, not just the mirror, how they reflect reality, but how they trigger the idea of opportunity. We can have positive societal change. And the pandemic was not just a turning point of tragedy and limitation and fragmentation, but also an opportunity to rethink our societies in an interconnected way, in a very positively interdependent way. So that would be, in a nutshell, the purpose of my analysis. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Cristina. And yeah, for the fourth presentation, before we open the floor for discussion, I would like to invite Sergey.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan, for your invitation. I'm glad to take a part in this session. And today I'd like to talk a little bit about such technique like field recordings. It's the term used for audio recordings, but not in the studio, in the field, out the studio. And it could be used like an instrument in such fields like biology to capture, for example, vocalizations in ecology, to capture soundscapes and instruments that help to understand this balance between the sounds that are produced by people, by human-produced sounds, and natural sounds. And yeah, of course, it could be used in social sciences, and it's possible to build different sound maps. And for example, during pandemic, we could see the development such kind of problems. The sounds map of pandemic, where people recorded different sounds of cities during pandemic, of different natural spots. Yeah, in my project, I use field recordings like something that have its own aesthetics. So it could be like a piece of sound art, and the main interest was how the world was changed, and how we can use this information, those recordings, after the pandemic. And I made some recordings near my home place, in different places in the city, in forest as well. And you can see that there are much less sounds that produced by people. There are less sounds from planes, from cars, from I don't know, from different other different other sounds produced by people, and you start to focus on the sounds, natural sounds, and you start to understand that the normal world that we saw before pandemic, it's a little bit shifted in a different way, in this way where human-produced sounds dominate on natural sounds. I guess there are a lot of such kind of projects could be found in the field. But anyway, I think it's quite interesting to see what happened in different sports, and I'm going to record the sounds after pandemic, of course. Now in Russia, the situation stabilized more or less. So all those sounds of cars and planes and sirens and so on, they get back, and yeah, it will be interesting to consider two different situations, how the world changed during pandemic and after the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Sergey. So I'm really impressed by the sort of rich connections between broader sense art and the pandemic. There exist. And I'm a quantitative researcher, and I gain most of my knowledge, which I see as a sort of important aim of my work, to gain insights or to create new knowledge. So I achieved that through working with data. And I would like to ask one question to all of you, and I would be happy if maybe two of you answered. Which insights could be gained through your work with art about the COVID-19 pandemic, which could go beyond working with statistical data like I do? I'd be happy, maybe anyone indicate with your hand if you want to answer. Cristina?
Let me cancel the silence. So I think all these approaches are complementary. I mean, you mentioned the statistics and the links about how the perceptions on the pandemic and also the incidents, the actual incidents, the number of deaths, the protocols that are taken evolve through time, how this is reflected through cartoons and the sources. I think this is very much related to how, for instance, historians see turning points in history. And also, I think there's a very important theoretical question that we always ask: what defines a turning point? So I think that's something we can work together about. Is the beginning of the pandemic, of course, a turning point. I don't know, vaccines can be a turning point, but also ways of learning to deal with the challenge of isolation, of fragmentation, of the limitation of the freedom of movement, and also plans B is something that we can do in conversation. So I would say that as a theoretical question, how do we define these turning points in the timeline would be a way to have a dialogue.
Thank you, great. Anna?
Yeah, it's a great question, Stefan. I think that what it might do, these kind of projects, is open up the question of what is data. Because I think that when we start to think of non-numerical data, like the sounds that Sergey's kind of been recording, what does it mean that to kind of explore the unmeasurable in terms of numbers? And what questions might that help ask about statistics and statistical methods and what that might be missing, or maybe it opens up new questions about what data is. I think that's what these projects do.
Thank you. That brings me to a follow-up question, which I would like to ask before handing over to the audience. Bach, I was thinking you and your team, you used art as therapy of mental health challenges people may face. And like the first thing I understand and think of, art is maybe used to help, sort of help with these challenges. But are you also like using, or could you imagine that the art is used as a form of expression to understand what is like causing possibly these challenges? So you would in a way have two aspects, maybe creating art as a process that is perceived helpful, but also taking the art which is created during these sessions and sort of looking at that to evaluate it further.
Yeah, I think it's important using the art if that is a habit to explore various dimensions of life and quality of life that data or like physical examinations were not able to reach. And we use art therapy as the means for, improving the communication and interaction of the children with their family and communities, given a very limited environments during the quarantine. And we also use art as not only the means of communication, but also the measures for improving the quality of life, and also to identify the very complexities of the needs of children during the COVID-19 control the stage. That's why the importance of incorporating art therapies to the pandemics control and preparedness in a country will help us not only identify the needs of the children, but also give us a channel for reaching and intervening on that target group.
Thank you. Andreea, you've been looking at the chat. Any questions already there?
No questions in the chat, but I wanted to ask Bach how he ended up because his research field seems to be very different from what he's doing now and art therapy. So I was wondering what was his transition from what he's actually researching to art therapy.
So we're looking at, our project has the 3 stages. The first stage, we do a global reviews of the use of art therapy among children to see how it's effective and feasible among different situations. The second stage of the project, we look at we conduct the feasibility assessment in the small group in Vietnam, and then we pilot to see the efficacy of the art therapies among this target population. And right now we are developing the content, and we believe that we can incorporate this content into different communication channels, for example, through teleconferencing, through the app and or other type media. So there's a process to really characterize the feature of the art therapy that would be feasible as a health intervention among children. So we try to make the technologies close, the combination of technology and art, and make it can be translated to the field.
So, Sergey, could I ask you, like, hearing about Christina's answer to the question, like how art can be used as data, for instance, to identify historic turning points, I wondered, is it also possible to use sound works as a historical document? For instance, when we look back to the pandemic, like how could we look at the sound created during this time?
Yeah, for sure. I think, first of all, those field recordings could help to understand what is happening during pandemic. For example, what how the situation changed. It's quite obvious because you know, it's audio documents, and we can see what how the city, for example, changed during pandemic, how the I don't know how the situation changed in different countries if we use these sound maps. But at the same time, people can record their you know, their routine and their houses, their small studios, and also we can understand through these recordings how the mood of the people was changed, how the I don't know how their routine changed. So yeah, of course, sounds good material for documents and documentation.
Where could I go to find existing sound documents?
If you type something like sound map, you can find a lot of such kind of projects, and there are even libraries, something like Free Sounds. It's a big library of sounds from the whole world, and
thank you. So I think we might have time to go through one round of questions to each of the speakers. So we have about 7 minutes left, so that we have a little gap between the next session. And let me maybe ask Anna again, where do you see the strength of artists and scientists working together, and which could be the challenges in doing so?
Yeah, I think one of the strengths is you're just taken out of your assumptions and your methodological assumptions. But that's also one of the challenges. I mean, if I just have an example, I had a meeting last week with an artist I'm collaborating with, and I didn't realize that all of our meetings were being recorded as part of the process to be in her artwork. That was a real revelation for me, that process is really something different in artistic production than it is in scientific production when you're just interested in the final product for publication. So that really forces you to communicate clearly and to say your assumptions and expectations. I don't know if others have experiences with this.
Yes, the COVID-19 and Art project is one experience, and it's exciting and challenging along the lines you described. Maybe, yeah, going on to ask Bach, yeah, how would you think artwork could be used to show some of the health challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, it's obvious the COVID-19 pandemic is substantially affecting quality of life in many different groups. But the important is that health sectors and other social sectors might not reach to any aspect of life. And art therapy shows how limited our current health interventions, especially in the purpose of improving quality of life and the well-being of the people, but also in like emergency. It's just really very limited, and and it also highlights the importance of of recognizing the intangible impact of COVID-19 on the mental health, especially for children. In Vietnam, this month we have the National Month for Children Protection, and we have highlighted that not only children infected or exposed to COVID-19 as vulnerable to the pandemics, but the second, the group vulnerable is that those who are neglected by their parents for other work, and who been forced by different ways because of the change in social life and working condition. And the third group is about those who have amplified the effect of COVID-19, who are already vulnerable and now are more vulnerable because of COVID-19, including those with cancer, with other type disease, who are in rural, remote area without internet connection, without electricity. So art therapy is not only a measure for us to reach in different aspects of life, but also it's also highlight the importance to recognize our limited in current public health intervention. And the most important thing is that this point have not been prioritized in the global COVID-19 preparedness and control activity right now. So it's important to work on it.
Thank you, Bach. And Cristina, I also know you've studied I think a wide variety of artwork. And so if I'm new to the topic, right, and I want to start and I have to choose one sort of accessible area to learn about the COVID-19 pandemic in a way artists express it, like where could I start?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I think it touches upon an aspect I really appreciate, which is the relation between intimacy and public expressions. So whenever we talk about public health and the pandemic in itself, we find two different kinds of artistic expressions. You find the public art, the socio-political, the economic reflections, and cartoons, they are very expressive about that. But you have other kind of complementary art expressions, which also touch upon the intimacy, the intimate, which is also very much in relation to the phenomenon and experience of fragmentation, isolation, and lockdowns on the whole. So I would say that museums have done an amazing work from that perspective, and they really brought together the intimacy and the public art dimension. And I was just mentioning to Sergey something that I think is very complementary to his work on soundscapes, which is a project by the Reina Sofia Museum of Contemporary Arts in Spain. And it's done by persons and families and collectives experiencing the pandemic and photographing their experience. And it can be homeless people, it can be immigrants, it can be just families or individuals realizing that it was a turning point again. And there's something I didn't mention about turning points, but I think is really fundamental, is the agency dimension. Who tells you that something is a turning point and for which purpose? So I think that for this project, we should very much emphasize the importance of analyzing agency. But this project, for instance, in this museum is called The Three Wounds. And I think it's also very much related to our next panel, because the basis for that is poetry. There's a poet called Miguel Hernández, who died in the 1930s, imprisoned by the fascists in the civil war in Spain. And Miguel Hernández talked about the three wounds. For him, the three wounds were death and life and love. So all these exhibitions and all these intimate portraits that persons and collectives take on themselves, they are arranged around death and life and love in an interconnected way. And then you have other examples by other museums like the Barbican in London. They created Okay, just very shortly. I can put the links in there. A call for young creatives to make a portrait of routine, as Sergey was saying as well, the routine of the pandemic from the eyes of young artists. So I think that museums have been a catalyst for this kind of bringing together the intimacy and the public art dimension. Thank you for the question.
Fantastic, thank you. And we are getting close to the next session, but I want to ask Sergey for like a final assessment, which also links in a way to what Bach said, the connection between art and health. Art can be used in a way as a therapeutic instrument, but also the COVID-19 pandemic may have had an impact on artists. Like from your knowledge of sound artists, how might the pandemic has affected like the life and work of artists?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you, Stefan. Yeah, we know that artists, especially sound artists, really depends on their studios and some sharing spaces, some instruments that, for example, couldn't be used in home, and it was a big challenge to stay at home and leave all those instruments, all those spaces behind. But artists, I think the main thing about artists is that they can find different ways to solve such kind of problems and to find the way for the solution. And yeah, they started to use creatively their home studios as a homes and different objects, and you can find a lot of projects where people play on, not on the instruments but on different stuff from your home place. And other thing that I want to mention, it's a huge amount of online concerts and online exhibitions, and people started to involve others to build, installations, for example, from different pieces of your, I don't know, from cards, from cups and so on, some stuff that you can find at home. So creatively use your space and work with different environments where you stay now, I would say.
Thank you. So I think, can we post the link to the next session in our chat? So for everybody who want to sort of and can stay tuned, then the next session will continue back to back. I want to thank our speakers of today and my colleagues, Anna, Bach, Cristina, and Sergey, also my co-moderator, Andreea, and the GYA office team, for technically hosting this session. I post a link to the COVID and Art website, and I very much look forward to the next session. And my final words are to everybody who joined us today. Thank you for joining.